Hi, everybody. Good morning, good day, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. And thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Stuart Cook. I am a Senior Product Marketing Manager at Cority, the industry's leader in converged EHS Plus solutions. I'm delighted to be the host for today's webinar, titled Come Together, Why Companies Are Consolidating Their EHS Software Applications and the Value They Are Getting from it. But before we start and do all of the fun stuff, a little bit of housekeeping. Number one, if you have any technical difficulties during the webinar, please click on the help widget. It has a question mark icon and covers most technical errors. If you have any questions for today's speakers, please submit them at any time using the Q&A widget on the right-hand side of your screen. We will do our best to answer as many questions as possible at the end of the webinar. Also, check out the resources section, which contains additional materials related to this webinar topic. If you have technical questions and they go into the Q&A, we won't get to answer them. So please make sure you're using the help widget for all of those things. Now that we have that out of the way, let's kick off with the good stuff. I would like to introduce my partner for today's festivities, Mr. Nathan Goldstein, a Senior Manager at Verdantix. Nathan specializes in EHS software and the convergence of sustainability, EHS, and operational risk. He leads research that helps corporate decision makers navigate evolving environmental regulations, digital information, and sustainability mandates, empowering them to align EHS performance with broader business and ESG goals. His current research agenda focuses on how technology and compliance strategies are evolving to support sustainability outcomes across operations. Nathan, thank you so much for being here today. It's a pleasure. Why don't I hand over to you briefly to talk about Verdantix and introduce today's agenda.
Yeah, appreciate that, Stuart. So like Stuart said, my name is Nathan Goldstein. Verdantix is the company I work for. Obviously, I otherwise wouldn't be here, but we are a research and advisory firm located in the UK with offices across the US and global operations. Market research and consulting firm, as I said earlier, we cover a number of different verticals through a variety of different modules and solution research arms covering EHS, ESG, industrial transformation, net zero, ESG, and risk. Across all of those, we help decision makers kind of identify ways forward, highlight their pain points, find solutions, and dig into the trends, budgets, priorities, and challenges that keep people up at night. Yeah, we help all kinds of clients and with all kinds of problems. You name it, we got a menu for it. So I'll be going over today's agenda. We'll be covering 4 different things today. First one we're going through is the drivers of consolidation. So what is moving the market together? What's pushing people to think about swapping to a full solution or dropping point ones on the side? And then the second agenda item is what's consolidating that in the larger market? What does that mean for the players? What does that mean for buyers on the small end? How are the different vendors looking at this challenge of consolidation and taking into account their own roadmaps? Thirdly, we're talking about the stakeholders on the buyer side. And what are their expectations? There are a lot of different departments that are involved in the process of consolidating your tech stack. Everyone's got different agenda items. Everyone's got different priorities and pain points. And so it's important to really realize what they're actually getting after, to be able to speak their language, and then what are the vendors doing about that? How are they turning around and saying, right, let's do X, Y, Z because of 1, 2, 3. And then finally, we'll be going through what to know and what to ask if you try to embark on this endeavor of consolidation. There are a lot of different pitfalls that appear out of nowhere. There are as many potholes as there are on an unpaved road in northern Michigan. So it's a good way to have a roadmap with you to kind of navigate the ones that are both well known and those that are maybe that pop up out of nowhere. But that's what we'll be covering today.
Great stuff. So we said up top that if you had questions for us, you could feel free to use the Q&A. We actually have some questions for you, the audience. So to help us understand who it is that we're talking to today, we'd love to invite you to click on the below. So the question is, how many different systems does your organization currently use that impact EHS processes? So we're going to sit here for 20 seconds or so. And just to clarify, systems that impact EHS can range from EHS-specific systems, but we're also thinking about point solutions. So, hey, maybe you have something that manages quality management. Maybe you have something that is a very specific tool for your permit to work solution. Just a vague number on the ones that you're aware of would be great. We will give just 3 or 4 more seconds for people to worm their way away from Teams and click on the screen. Okie dokie. So moving on. So this is what we're looking at. We're looking at people with definitely less than 10 is the majority of the people that we're talking to today, which is great to see. And most people between 0 to 5, which is good to know. Okay. So, okay, I'm going to hand back over to Nathan to talk about our first agenda item, which is what's driving EHS consolidation. Take it away.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Theo. So let's start off with some data. Let's look at the bigger picture, go to 50,000 feet or Mount Everest, as some corporates speak. Part of Verdantix research agenda every year is we run a global corporate survey. This covers a range of different questions that we ask in a variety of different ways to around 300 leaders of EHS decision makers, all the way from VPs to senior managers and everything in between. And these questions cover the budgets, trends, priorities, and challenges they face. And one of the two we always ask is how important are following operational goals over the next 2 years. And there's a number of trends here I'd like to pull out. One is that reducing SIFs is always at the top, or if not at right beneath it. And between the previous year and this year, we saw a pretty big jump in the allocation of most important to reducing SIFs. With the advances in tech, the cross-knowledge sharing that's happening at events, folks having private conversations with their colleagues across the workforce, this is really pushing to become kind of the #1 focus, and rightfully so. It's a really big thing, right? Secondly, is that developing a firm-wide safety culture. The move to making every EHS professional, or every professional in the workplace, an EHS professional, is becoming more and more not only a kind of far-off theory, but a reality. Putting the proper tech in the the hands of frontline workers, training those who are adjacent to EHS processes. These are all ways that you can really bring safety to the forefront and instill it in the back of everyone's mind. The most important thing is everyone to get home. And even if your job isn't directly on safety, you can still be someone who goes, hey, that doesn't look great. That looks broken, or this looks dangerous. Let me log them. And so there's 2 ways to do that. One is just by instilling that knowledge, and 2, by having the right tech. And the important thing is that having that tech is tech that works. Because nothing's more frustrating than having to open 5 different apps on your phone to complete one workflow. I had a conversation about a year and a half ago with a long-haul trucker up in Canada, working for a mining company. And we were doing kind of a tech study on how do you actually consolidate. The company was looking to move to a new vendor, and we were getting in nuts and bolts with this gentleman. And I asked him, how many apps do you use? What is your biggest pain point? He goes, look, I have to open one app to log my hours, one app to log my distance, one app to log how much time I put in, and then based on all of that, if that's too much, I have to open another app that tells me how to de-stress as if I don't want to go to sleep. That's a pretty good example of kind of an individual pain point on that front. But on this as well, I want to pull out 2 things, right? That monitoring EHS compliance. The compliance aspect has always been part of EHS. It's been a check the box. Now it's moving towards confidence beyond compliance, towards a future look ahead with the regulatory uncertainty. But the moving beyond that compliance, instilling kind of better safety culture, better safety practices, better EHS practices is part of that whole tech stack talk, right? You have a technology that can keep abreast of regulatory changes, can cover in other countries. I'm going to get ahead of myself though. They're all facing challenges in different ways, but these are all operational challenges. And the way to leverage this and move past the human aspect, right, is tech. So these 2 slides and these 2 data questions are very interconnected. Operational goals can be done with pencil and paper. We all know that, but it's an inefficient process. And the range of tech that is out there now is so diverse, so many different challenges, so many potential solutions, that you have to figure out a way to cut through that. And so we've asked this question around, what are you looking for when it comes to indicator metrics? How do you centralize that data? And the leading indicator metric moved up. The advent in technology that aligns, that helps people kind of get real-time data quickly, put it into one place. These are all possibilities now. And when firms look at their current tech stack and they go, wow, I have 10 to 15 to 20, on the larger end, if you're a very high risk operator, maybe 5 or 6 if you're on the lower end of the risk rate. This is still a nightmare, not only for your EHS teams, but for your IT team, your operators, your budget. Every single one of those has their own kind of, billing cycle. And so moving towards that is a way to cut down on that as well. I want to point out too that proactive management has been a pretty big trend within EHS in the past couple of years, and it's going to continue to be a significant one. Out of 6 of these goals we all asked, around 35% of them put that as their leading one. And that's tied, looking back to that previous slide, around SIFs and incidents and injuries. How do we stay ahead of that management? How do we integrate key employee observations and metrics such as corrective actions and moving into those? Which ties into that second one, centralizing that data management. How do we bring that all together and prevent data silos? And of course, we asked a question on AI. We always have to ask a question around AI these days, and we'll get into that a little bit later. But I'm excited to say that there's a lot going on AI in the EHS space. A lot of us here at Verdantix are keeping a close eye on it. We're having conversations every week. And over the past 6 months, I would say it moved from the buzzword LinkedIn cyclone of we do AI, to now we're seeing distinct, valuable use cases that come back with a clear ROI. And this is going to change the game in many ways. But first and foremost, EHS remains a person-centric function. So AI will always be a helper and a tool in the toolbox that EHS professionals have. So let's talk about some niche challenges. As EHS operators and function heads, we all know that there are a number of different hats that we all wear. This includes everything from environmental compliance to chemical compliance and now product compliance related challenges. The push towards sustainable products, the push towards kind of supply chain, the increasing knowledge around what chemicals are harmful or not. A great example is PFAS. In a previous life, I used to be a water scientist at USGS, and while PFAS wasn't on my list of daily operations, it was something we monitored quite closely. I'm also from the state of Michigan, and that was where PFAS kind of kicked off. Was found in incredibly high concentrations. And for those who don't know, PFAS is an acronym for a very long string of consonants and vowels that stands for a chemical family known as chemicals because they stick around. They are known carcinogens in some ways, and there's no way to get rid of them, although some studies may suggest now that blood donating is the way to do that. But you'll just get more in you. It's like our grandparents lead, and our grandparents before that, asbestos. But in the manufacturing side, this has now become an item of concern and is outlawed or banned outright in some states or regions. So how do you ensure that that is not getting into your supply chain, A, but B, how do you ensure that's not getting into your workers who are exposed to that on the factory line? And so the conjunction of safety data sheets, tracking those chemical regulatory applicabilities, thinking about the minute amounts of thresholds, milliliters on milliliter, parts per million, is now kind of coming into the EHS sphere of operation. In the past, it's been, all right, we spilled a little bit of chemicals. What's our cleanup procedure? And where do we log that with the APA? And now it's getting a lot more granular. And so you need tech that can do that on that scale, which means you might be looking for a new solution that can do both that and everything else. But let's then move. We talked about challenges. We talked about priorities. Let's talk about a point solution nightmare. And at the flip side, what an ideal solution looks like. What are folks striving to? This right here is your kind of ideal goal. You're having, many different systems that feed into one, and ideally, it's one that can do all of this. Now, that may not be the case for many of you, and that's probably why you're here today. But there are vendors that do this, and they have their heritage and specialities in different areas. But where they may be lacking What we've seen in the past year, and I'll touch on this later, are partnerships as a way to kind of bridge that gap. But I get ahead of myself. Looking at this right here, I want you to envision that you have a point software for each one of these operations, or maybe 2 or 3. That's a nightmare for your operations team, like I said, for your IT team. There's just security risk left and right with those. There's different logins, there's lost passwords, there's billing cycles, like I said. One of them may go out of date, so you have to maintain it internally, or the interlinkages may not work properly. The nightmares of issues I hear about this really not only keep them up late at night, but like sometimes when I'm running a port on this, I'm like, oh man, this is not great. So this is kind of both the hell landscape we think about when there's point solutions and the ideal platform that we want when we think about it. And then I believe finally, let's touch on those regulations. We talked about the chemical side. But let's look at the global side, right? If you're an international organization that covers operations across 5 different regions, and as we think about the United States with the regulatory uncertainty, we're seeing certain states step out ahead and say, we're going to do this better and different. California, New York, to a certain extent, Massachusetts, and maybe even Minnesota. All of these states are moving incredibly far ahead with not only their climate regulations, but potential safety regulations. Where Mississippi goes, that's anyone's guess, but that's Mississippi, right? And I apologize if anyone here's from Mississippi. But then there are other regions around the world too. The EU, not only is the EU putting out blanket regulations, but different member states such as Germany, France, or Austria are coming out with their own. Australia and New Zealand market have their own kind of nuances. Those are 2 markets that we see pop up a lot in our very high risk operations ban, which is where we keep oil and gas, metals and mining, and chemical. So they have their own kind of list of challenges. And then ISO standards. Another thing, another box to check, but a very important box nonetheless. So when you're thinking about a regulation aspect, you want a platform that can do all of this everywhere. Not, in a certain countries or certain regions, but you want a vendor who you can trust to stay up to date, on the ball, and let you know if anything's changing so you can change as well. So we've covered kind of what the drivers of consolidation are, right? Let's talk about what that means for the market. So as part of Verdantix research, we take an ongoing tracker of who's buying who's investing in what, who's selling where, and who's partnering with who. It's an important thing to note that this is happening in the EHS market. And it's shifted over the past couple of years, and it's changed. I would say that at the top of the band, right, there are those enterprise software players. We've seen a good amount of consolidation, snapping into that middle range. A good example would be the EHS DQ benchmarking study we run every year. Over the past 3 years, we've seen some consolidation and vendors being integrated successfully or unsuccessfully, it's a different topic, into those and decreasing the number from, I think, 4 years ago to around 20 or 19 just this past year. What we're also seeing is that look down from those enterprise players. They're looking into that mid-market area. They're looking into that SME or that startup area, identifying vendors that have a really promising aspect for use case and value add. And then saying, hey, that matches perfectly with ours, and it covers an area that maybe we don't. And those are being snapped up. And so this is those smaller specialist target axes. We're thinking really around those EHS trainings, chemicals, and ESG and supply chain regulation. A new one that's kind of come to the fore and is mainly we're seeing through kind of the partnership aspect is that regulatory compliance with content. And then I'd say finally too is that around this year and maybe the past 6 months of last year, there was a definitive slowdown. And that doesn't mean the market's stagnating. Far from. Every week I do at least 3 or 4 briefings with different vendors. And there are new operations, new modules, new functionality coming out on a rolling basis, and it's very exciting to watch. So the larger vendors are now turning inward and saying, right, these are the market pressures we're facing. Our platform can no longer keep up with that. What do we need to change, and how can we do it quickly, and more importantly, good and well? That's perfect English there. How can we do it well? So on those partnerships, this is kind of what that partnership environment looks like. We're seeing that EHS software partnering with a number of different areas. Those EHS content, those reg content, SDS or chemical firms, those who maybe have a ton of libraries of SDS sheets for a very specific niche. AI and emerging tech, this is a really exciting space Verdantix, those computer vision, those digital twins, RFID tags. These are all ways to cover aspects of EH&S operations with a novel technology that, while adding to your tech stack, provides real hard data that can help you keep people safe. On the specialist EHS solutions, we're seeing root cause analysis, ESG emissions, occupational health is a really interesting one as well. Critical event management, right? If something goes wrong, letting everyone know that everyone's safe. Mental health, total worker health has been a big priority for the EHS space for the past about a year, I'd say. And it's really inspiring to see that mental health is now really coming to light, and people are taking, not accountability, but really understanding that what happens on up here affects everything else down here. And there is a direct link between mental health and physical health. So while that's another problem to have, there are solutions that can help you do it, and there's really no need to go out and buy a new one. We'll get into that later. On the plugin software features, DocuSign translation, services firm, technology partners, all of these are ways that vendors these days are saying, right, this is what the market demands. How do we shift? How do we pivot? How do we respond to that? And more importantly, how do we keep it easy for our customers and not bolt on 5 to 10 steps, 2 new bills, and like 3 new provider teams, right? A lot of these may be industry specific. You know, your chemicals, oil, and gas operators are not going to be looking at the same stuff that white collar, banking, and maybe hospitality operators are. But at the end of the day, they both have the same problem of wanting to decrease the amount of solutions they have, decrease their budgets, make it easier for them while simultaneously making it easier for people to see. And partnerships are a great way to do that. So number of partnerships and trends in the market right now. In the past, in 2023, there was around 12 partnerships. In 2024, there was around 18. And we'll have our latest numbers in about a month and a half for 2025. But there are, 4 different trends we see in who you're partnering with, right? There's a consulting and implementation teams. So getting a larger market, having those problems addressed quicker, having resellers and making sure your software can get to more people. Then there's the EHS content and software, right? This is your regulatory lists, your specialist SDS providers, your regional regulatory content providers. And then there's the hardware and Internet of Things. This is your wearables. I'm wearing a Whoop right now, right? The Aura rings that we're seeing across the board. I can't tell you how many times I've seen LinkedIn ads for Aura rings for your team, which for me seems a bit silly, but I guess it makes sense if you're working at a place that keeps you up late at night and you have to track your sleep a little better. And then software development, right? How do we optimize? How do we decrease our memory load? How do we increase efficiency across the different tech stack? These are all kind of the 4 biggest partnership angles we've seen over the past year. Training content, again, extremely popular. And that's not only for those niche markets, but it's also for different areas. Are you trying to revitalize your training? When we think about the pyramid of EHS, right, and how do you create an EHS professional? Training is always that bottom one. That bottom is not a derogatory term in the sense. It is the foundational aspect of training, of being an EHS individual professional that allows you to better know your duties and better execute on them. And then finally, at a more high-level aspect, what are some strategic and functional trends we've seen across the EHS market over the past year and this year so far? Is that market consolidation is continuing. It may have slowed down a little bit. Many vendors may have already bought the ones that they were targeting for the past 2-3 years. And based on the roadmaps I've seen, they've got a big one ahead of them, which is exciting, but we're going to wait and see how that plays out. Partnership is a huge thing we're seeing right now, and we continue to see as more tech comes online, more vendors have the bandwidth, more teams develop to engage in excellent partnerships. The development of ESG and sustainability functionally is widespread. What I will say on that, though, there are, of course, regions where that is uncertain. And there are code switches in languages and how people talk about sustainability and ESG, but there's still a pivotal role and will never go away, thankfully. Finally, supply chain sustainability and just supply chain in general, huge expansion area. Over the past year, we've also noticed a trend where the contracting company is being held accountable for contractors' injuries and liabilities. So this doesn't only raise challenges of EHS. Are your contractors keeping safe, staying in dock? Your dock workers, your dock loaders, if you are a shipping company or the port owner, right? But now you're also asking questions around, what are their emissions? What are their products they're using? What are the training and licenses that they have? We've seen this construction, but now we're seeing it across the board, the heavy increase of contractor usage in pretty much every vertical. And with that comes the whole nightmare of engaging them, talking to them, making sure they're keeping safe, are they up to date, etc. On the functional side, right, UI and software design is never complete. It is a Gregorian knot, the Sisyphusian task. There are always ways to improve UI and UX and software design, making it quicker, getting to the data you need with less clicks. Especially important with that consolidation aspect. When we're thinking about when you're bringing in kind of disparate sets of software, integrating that properly into your operations is key. We have seen some break and make those processes. On the AI side, it'll proliferate everywhere. We're seeing very specific use case deployments right now, which we're very thankful for. It's moved away from that buzzword, static, nebulous space, and now we're seeing discrete examples of how applying AI to this data set will help you improve, say, heat mapping or video analytics, auto-identifying hazard behaviors or PPE. Does someone cross into a space they shouldn't be in, et cetera. Platform architecture is now gaining its rightful spot in the sun. What was once kind of only the domain of the IT departments and those who look at code like it's their fifth language, which to me it's just magic when you get really nitty gritty with it, right? But this is now coming to the forefront. C-suites, boards are talking about this, which has not been the case in the past. And then finally, vendors are revisiting those connected devices and IoT streams. In the past, it was just like, a hard hat that can tell your temperature or your vital sign, right? Now, with the absolute proliferation of Whoops, Oura Rings, Fitbits, Apple Watches, Garmin's, what are the other giant running watches we see, right? These are all ways now that operators and EHS functions are taking actually seriously because of the advances in their accuracy. A great use case for our lone workers or individuals in heat stress areas. And heat stress area doesn't have to be a desert or an arid area. You could be working in a warehouse that's not properly ventilated, or a boiler room, right, that reaches temperatures of 110 degrees. Heat stress can strike at any time, and with the way the climate's going, it's going to be more of an issue in the future. So finally, or our third agenda, not finally, I apologize, is stakeholders and expectations, right? Who are these folks? What are they asking? What do they need? How do you talk the language?
So before we get into that, so Nathan has a bunch of stuff that is really insightful on research that's been conducted, but we were hoping to understand from our audience today, which departments influence the decision to add or consolidate EHS technology within your organization? So as somebody that's on the software provision side of things, we're very used to talking to all of these groups and more. We think these are the most common ones. If you have additional ones that are specific to your organization that have a real voice in the technology selection process or consolidation process, throw them in the Q&A. Let us know which ones are and you think should have more of a say or less of a say. It's always interesting to hear. We'll give another 2 seconds for people to click. For those that joined late, all you have to do is click on the items that apply to you. You can select more than one too. We're hovering around a 30% kind of participation. So there we go. We're getting a couple more trickle in. I can see them happening. So okay, let's see what we got here. Well, a healthy chunk of people have said all of the above, which makes a lot of sense. I was going to say, and specifically EHS being brought in to talk about consolidation or addition to EHS technology, it's a little bit of a relief to hear. But yeah, no, a fairly even spread. Surprising to not see many people only selecting operations. We can see that happening more and more. But I want, I will stop talking about my experience and see what Nathan has to say about the the data to back that up. So take it away.
No, this is a great slide and a great data cue too, because it's the all of the above I thought would have been much higher. The selection of operations. It's good to see EHS take the lead, obviously, but the reality is, and we all know it, that's not the case. They're not the ones who are commanding everything. Unfortunately, if we had our way, the world would be a lot safer place. But that's the nature of the world we live in. So before we talk about who those folks are, let's talk about what we're using, right, as EHS professionals. And this is a very busy slide. I'm aware of that. We've tried to make it visually appealing. Our graphics department spent a long time and a good amount of focus groups with us. What are the pleasing colors to you? I think it works, but maybe I'm biased, right? These are all different tech we see across the board currently, in use. And this also reflects what folks want, and we'll get on that in a little bit, right? EHS applications has been this has been a repeat question, by the way, in our survey over the past couple of years. And EHS applications is always at the top, if not near the top. It's just the way the world goes. We all have phones, we all have tablets now. It's just interconnecting data at a quicker way. But there's ways to do it well, and there's ways to do it bad, and that can make or break, right? This goes back to that engaging and creating a safety culture, putting tech in the hands of people who become then EHS professionals. Critical event management solutions was a surprising one for us to jump this far up this past year. That's maybe because of events that happened over the past year, or the realization that this can become a much more helpful tool in certain industries. Chemicals, for example, or logistics, or local firefighting police departments. A good example, maybe not the best adjective to use, would be the train derailment that happened in East Palestine, Ohio, I believe middle of last year. What happened was the train derailed, there was a brake failure, the train had turned a little bit too fast, and the resulting combination of combustibles and chemicals and just materials in the train resulted in a doomsday-looking cloud over this very sleepy town. And there was a huge worry of what was in that train that caused this cloud. Were our first responders going to be safe? Did they have the proper PPE? And critical event management could have been a way that those individuals were notified to bring the right gear. And thankfully, after the investigation, there wasn't anything incredibly hazardous. There was a huge worry, and I had the worry as well of whatever was in the train cars, the water stream, the water system, the water table, and poisoning that river. But thankfully, it wasn't the worst there. But critical event management has a lot of applications when it comes to EHS operations these days, and we're seeing it now become a bit more of a focus because of the advancements in tech and just making it easier. The third one here, the digital mental health and well-being, right? We already talked about how it's becoming more priority, and rightfully so. And we're seeing a lot of novel solutions that really address this problem because folks are understanding what happens at work is influenced by A, at work, but B, outside of work. And so the training, the availability of therapy courses or meditation and well-being. Lord knows I could use some of that as well, but I believe we all can take a breather, and that's the one way that each professional is doing that. Across this, though, it just shows you how wild the amount of tech is out there. There are different stakeholders for each of these who are asking for these. When you sit down at the table, when you're engaging in an RFP process, even before you even engage a vendor, right? It's vitally important that you have many internal meetings with all the stakeholders that could be involved, that all have a slice of the pie to say and spend, and say, what are your priorities? What do you need to do? What do you use now to do that? And if not, what do you want or need? Some of these are a bit, on the niche end, right? Virtual reality or augmented, drones or aerial vehicles, digital sensors. But if you're a large enough operation, say a conglomerate that has hands in many different pots and verticals, you may very well be using every single one of these and just not know it, because your EHS department doesn't talk to another EHS department in a different vertical. And if you're not having internal collaboration on that aspect, I don't think their chances are good at talking higher or lower in that stakeholder chain. So it's important to realize what you have, what you need, what you don't have, who uses it, who doesn't use it, and what do they want. So the wider view. Who are those other internal stakeholders? And Verdantix has a floating deck of around maybe 5,000 to 4,000 slides of different graphics you can use. And there are a lot of them that have this head shape. And I do not want to insult anyone on this call about the respective placements of these groups, right? Although maybe something could be said for leadership at the forefront of the brain, right? Maybe not always be there. And IT being at behind, the old the million brain back. So what do these different groups want? They all want different things, right? Leadership wants to decrease budgets. They want the quickest results. Something horrific may have happened, landing on their desk, caused some internal outrage. May have been a fine to pay or some negative reputational risk happened. The leadership goes, I want this solved now and as quickly as possible with as little as fuss. And then you as an EHS professional go, great, well, we got to talk to operations. We got to talk to IT. Operations may have their own challenges. IT is always in the background saying, this could be better. This doesn't work right. We could ease this. We can make this quicker. They have their own priorities. They are all wizards and mages, and we love them for it, right? But there are additional ones out there, right? There are risk and legal teams. There are finance and procurement teams. There are the sustainability and ESG teams, the quality teams, the R&D, the HR teams, and the contracting logistics teams. Each one of these have their own challenges and their own viewpoint of how the solution should work, right? HR is probably more focused on training or focused on kind of connecting those medical documents with, I'm forgetting the word for it now, but medical leave or leaves of absence, right? Tying those two together for maybe a workplace injury and workers' comp. R&D is looking at it from a product perspective. They're making the chemical or pharmaceutical aspect. That ties into quality, right? Quality, what do they need? Maybe more video analytics for their product lines, their factory lines, right? There are vendors who can do that. Sustainability, ESG, they're always asking for that data around air quality, water quality, what are our emissions, what are our wastes, right? Contracting logistics. With the increase in contracting now, there's a bigger push to have better platforms that can engage with the suppliers, engage with those contractors. The contractor lifecycle itself, from pre-qual, onboarding, training, certification, evaluation, and at the end, right? That is a whole world unto itself. And the nebulous amounts of issues we see across that tie deeply into each one of these in their own special ways. Finance procurement, right? They're looking at the bottom line. They're looking to make sure the company is profitable. They're not only looking at the numbers though. There are arguments to be made, and there are strong arguments with verified use cases and mountains of research behind them that by keeping everyone safer, your work is more profitable. You avoid those downtime risks. You avoid kind of any horrific injury that may cause fines or chaos, right? But what's more though is that being safe is a bragging right. It is something to be proud of. In conversations I have with these professionals every week, when we're doing these RFP processes, and we're talking about tech stacks, there was one we were working with a mining company, I believe, about 2 months ago. And we were holding different regional focus groups, one for Europe, one for America, South America, and Asia. And in each and every one of them, the senior managers and above stated, I wouldn't work here still if I knew they didn't have our back. And it's being demonstrated to me by the fact that we're going through this process. And they admitted to leaving previous companies because their words, their raises and warnings, or raises of issues and warnings, were not being taken into consideration. So you keep good people at your firm by being safe. So that is a very strong use case when you're talking to financial leadership too, right? Each of these departments use different language when they're speaking about their work. And when you're thinking about the influence they have, it's important to think about what do they think about? What makes their head tick? What do they do on a day-to-day basis? And how do we transform the valid and rightful argument of safety into aspects that each of them can understand, bring them all to the table, be harmonized, organized, aligned, synergistic, if you will, from corporate buzz speak, and really embark on that journey defining and consolidating your tech stack into a more holistic platform. So let's think about the historic functions and pain points across the board, right? There are both software challenges, implementation challenges, and maintenance challenges. And we've talked about some of them in adjacent ways, but let's start on the far left and we'll make our way across the slide. For the functional slide, right? Poor usability, inhibiting user engagement. In that mining RFP process I was talking about that happened 2 months ago, one of their issues that they had 3 different softwares two of them in which they had to re-enter data manually each time for the same thing. That was a nightmare. And in certain factory sites, we found that the senior managers were doing a workaround and doing it for everyone else. They appointed someone just to be a data logger. And that could have been an intern, that could have been a senior manager, but that alone is a big issue, right? Go back to that trucking example as well. No one likes having multi, apps to log in. And Lord knows, I even get annoyed at Salesforce for making me have a multi-factor authentication. But the fact of the matter is that not only is secure, but it's also safer. The data is low quality or not standardized, right? If you're an international organization complying with 5 different regulatory bodies, think about California too. Each one of those has their own way of how it must be submitted, formatted, queried, requested, you name it, right? And if you're not getting good data in, you're going to be putting bad data out, right? Garbage in, garbage out is a common thing. That manual process, again, leaves room for errors left and right. We are humans. We all make mistakes. We endeavor and try our best to let that happen, but it's still a fact of being human. If we were perfect, we all wouldn't be here, right? We'd be probably leading some company or flying in space or scuba diving in the Caribbean. Compliance reporting is highly manual, time-consuming. It can be a lot. And with the regulatory uncertainty we're seeing here in the United States, this could become more of an issue. As more states do it their own way, instead of one federal jurisdiction, you may be now referring to 2 federal departments that have minor oversight, 4 states that have very high oversight, and then some states that don't at all. So manual process is a nightmare. That's also compliance. Digital workflows vary across sites. Different sites, even on the same tech stack, may be at different updates. They could have different versions. They could have one from 3 cycles ago while the one across the street is fully up to date. If you're not working with a vendor who can synchronize and roll out in a timely manner, there are exceptions to be made when it comes to new tech and tech stacks for beta testing, right? But making sure that every one of your sites is having a proper digital workflow that is standardized is just a lifesaver. And then the inability to gather required information for reporting. This could be every one of those different stakeholders we said in the previous slide, right? If you can't bring that all together, tell the proper story, report the proper documents, you're in a lot of trouble. On the technical side, the system is not fully configured. It's not fit for purpose. We've all heard this. It's a nightmare. You have a tool that was sold to you as the latest and greatest, right? But in reality, it's nothing like what you need. That's horrific. That's not going to work. Latency performance issues, right? If it's falling behind, are you on-prem? Are you off-prem? These are specific challenges faced by maybe oil and gas offshore rigs, or those in areas where data connection might not be the greatest. The system lacks adaptability. How do you easily change a user? How do you change words, org structure? Role-based access controls is something that's very important and is awfully overlooked by anyone but IT or power users. We talked about the data silos, and then the worst case one, these systems fail on a basic security and data protection requirements. Let's think back to that previous slide, right? The contracting, legal and risk, HR, R&D. Every single one of those have their own proprietary data, have their own mission critical data, and if that is breached, oh boy, that's no one's in for a good time. That head's gonna roll from the top of the hill down the bottom. And then on the right side, right, implementation team is inexperienced. There's nothing worse than getting a team that is either a consulting group that has, this is a dime a dozen. They fly around every other week to drop a new site. They really don't care about you. They're there to get the job done and be gone, right? The reliance on software provider to make basic configurations. You, as an operator, as an EHS professional, know what's best. And while, yes, the vendor may have a whole body of experts on their side, being at least able to have the conversation with them about, hey, I want to do it this way. Do you think this works? Can I do it on this own? Means that you can eliminate weeks of back and forth time with the vendor. And if they're a small vendor, that could be a big problem. Finally, that slow and painful migration to cloud-based versions, and customers feel deprioritized and receive slow support. The deprioritization one is one that's a slow burn, and grow up to be the biggest issue we see when companies are looking for a different vendor. So these are all kind of the challenges and pain points we've seen historically. So what are vendors doing to address that, right? Well, they're working on compliance and oversight, building that consistent, well-defined workflow for logging, investigating, resolving incidents and near misses, and any other thing we solve around that. They're building those centralized data views. The configuration and dashboards that I have seen change over the past 6 months, if not a year, has astounded me. The way vendors are interconnecting data is really bringing trends and nuances that would never have been able to be seen now to the forefront. And operators are acting on those and knocking off a whole cascade of issues. The alignment of internal processes, making sure all those departments can speak to one another. On the auditability side, we're seeing that calculation of engines to manage those high volume calculations for air emissions. And not only in air emissions, this is also now speaking about supply chain, right? When you have all the departments talking to one another, all that data has previously been siloed. Now you can judge contractors and suppliers not only on sustainability, but also on their safety, on their training, on their incidents and near misses. That's bringing together procurement, EHS, contracting, procurement, and sustainability, right? All of them together in one room, looking at the same dashboard, making the same informed decisions. And the key word in that sentence is informed. Strong controls for data management, improving the data ingestion. When you think about all those different point solutions that you currently have, or trying to eliminate or move to a partner or a vendor that has partnerships with those that are already in-house, that means you can get rid of those antiquated push-pull APIs or other kind of import-export by Excel only. Lord knows I already work enough in Excel, and I know that everyone else will be better off without Excel. But it's a fact of life and what we have to use. So ways to move around that manual process and ingest that data quicker on a more rapid basis to get that real-time data is huge, and vendors are responding that way. Finally, on the far right, engaging, consistent user experience, bringing in those AI agents, those AI helpers. I would say that there are a number of vendors that maybe just have a chat, but there are a number of vendors that have their own, and have built and their own AI agents on internal data that is relevant to what the EHS operations do. And they consistently watch those. The AI teams I have seen spring up, the rigorous threshold that they train, they monitor, they test, they evaluate, is very comforting for someone who's a sci-fi fantasy kind of enthusiast, right? The chances of Skynet happening from an EHS perspective are very little, but that could happen elsewhere. That's not my problem, right? Finally, the use of mobile functionality, the single point of entry, intuitive UI, all of these are the basis of what we're going to be seeing the platform of tomorrow. The proper consolidated EHS leader who understands those previous pain points, addresses them, continues to address them, and stays at the leading edge of what keeps EHS operators up at night. So for our final section, what to know and what to ask. So a little bit more data before we pivot any further. So we run this question every year. We ask it every other month or every other week when we're doing an RFP process with a vendor or a client on the advisor side. What are the most important items in terms of influencing your purchase decision? And we've seen some shift in this over the past couple of years, right? Mobile applications are now table stakes. It's expected. In the past, it wasn't, and it was something that was a make or break, and it still is for certain industry verticals. But now we're seeing that platform architecture and scalability and solution interoperability come to the fore. Secondly, the total cost of ownership. This is always a floating around the top, if not the top. It's one that you just can't escape. But the fact of the matter is, if you are moving from, say, 10 different point solutions, one enterprise EHS vendor, to an EHS enterprise vendor that has maybe 3 point solutions attached to it, that bill is going to drop. And that's going to be an easier way to kind of address the financial challenges of, maybe you're on different billing cycles, aligning it with your own quarterly goals, your own profitability aspects. The total cost of ownership is now being a lot easier to address in the context of consolidation. And we see how consolidation has moved from being a lot goal to now an actual, tangible, reachable goal, right? The industry expertise and strength of customer base has become another one that we've seen rise a lot. Heritage of vendors and their awareness of your problem is now coming to the forefront in these RFP processes. You're not going to be with a vendor who has no applicability to what you do and may say they do. You're not going to be doing some digging as an operator into that vendor. Can they back up? Can they talk the talk? And more importantly, can they walk the walk? AI, you also see on there the deployment timeline, the pre-configured workflows, the sales process management, and self-configuration tools. The self-configuration tools, how to hire one in previous years are most important, but we're seeing with the configurability of enterprise vendors and consolidated vendors who are taking this into account, that's dropped in most important. It's now another table stakes one aspect. I'm aware, just being aware of time, right? Lack of EHS digital strategy. These are all different aspects of what you're looking at for different things. You have potential issues across the board for different aspects, management, change, control of work. Making sure your vendor can do all of these is a very important process. And making sure you have a digital strategy on how you as a vendor or an operator are going to do all of these is also especially important. Finally, underestimating the complexity of deploying a global solution. There are 6 things we see at the top of the board for this, right? If you're a global company, there are different compliance requirements across the board. Language requirements, another sleeper challenge, right? If you have operations in Southeast Asia or across Latin America, the regional nuances in languages spoken may be vastly different. And we've heard time and time again through legal focus groups is that when the vendor only puts out data or standard operating procedures, or even your global corporate head office in a specific language, those translations lose a lot of meaning and can be very inaccurate. And furthermore, when you're talking about the frontline workers, distilling that information from a lofty corporate goal of a 0 incident work goal into tangible means for those frontline workers in their native language can lose a lot of that, corporate buzz speak or just operational procedural. Cultural practices is another one we see being a slow burn. The existing solution landscape, your operations in Indonesia may be vastly different from those in Mexico, right? And making sure that those solutions are the same across the board and they fit both as belt and profit is huge. The rest of these, I think, are self-explanatory. The discrete configuration needs and the contractor operates in each product. Next, selecting an each product that isn't a true EHS platform, right? There are a lot of different vendors out there who say they're an EHS professional or a vendor, and they may very well be only operating on one specific pain point or problem. And this is just a range of them we see here, right? There are broad EHS vendors who do everything okay or something subpar. There are those who are safety specialists, AI-first vendors, localized vendors, vertical vendors, right? That's more of a quality issue or a gas issue or chemicals. More, each of these have their own great sales pitch. It's important to keep a very unbiased eye as a professional when engaging in this process because there are a lot of tips and tricks that smaller vendors or discrete vendors use to say we do everything, we do it very well, when the fact is that they don't. And then you're stuck with a different point solution 5 years down the line. So another issue is the alignment with the vendor organization, right? You could be a giant whale of an organization, or you could be a very small, mid-sized organization. And if you are engaging a vendor that is not applicable to your size and scalability, you're going to be finding that reeling in that fish at the end of the day, or keeping up with that line and not making sure it breaks, is going to be impossible. They can't keep up with your process. They can't scale. They can't address your challenges. And you may very well run into issues down the line. Secondly, the level of tech you need is the level of tech you want, right? There are so many new gadgets and widgets and cool things out there, but it's important to look at what your pain problems are now and what they're going to be in 2 to 3 years. And does that vendor have the ability to address what you have challenged now? And what's their roadmap? Look into that, dig into that. Have they addressed it? Make sure they don't sell you some buzzword or some fancy tool that you're never going to use, right? Don't be bought into that hype. Make sure you're being very objective, very discreet, line by line items. Third, global operations, location. Do they have support teams? Can they assist you 24/7 if that's your operation? You don't want to be stuck waiting for someone in Australia to help you if you're located in the North American region. And then finally, industry expertise. If you're a mining vendor or a warehousing vendor, right, you're not going to be going with a chemical vendor. You're not going to be going with a solely like AI-driven vendor. You want a vendor that has SMEs in-house, that have a number of customers, that have the same pain point that you do. Speak to similar customers, ask for customer references, talk to them about what the process is and how it looks like, and how does that vendor stack up against their own challenges. And let's talk about the stakeholder engagement. I know we have limited time left, so I can speak to these next couple of slides, but leadership, right? What's their language they speak? They control the budget, they give the go, no-goes. They're not a single group, but they're individuals with different objectives, right? The C-suite is a C-suite for a reason. Each one of them have their own operation challenges, their own language. Next, EHS yourself. You either see EHS or IT leading on these RFPs. And even if EHS is not leading, not involving your colleagues is a huge mistake. We talked about in the past, right? There are EHS departments across the world who all have different goals, all have different pain points and problems. And not sharing that knowledge or not even talking about the problem you have leads to major roadblocks down the line. Operations, ultimately acceptance by these guys is going to be the biggest determinant of your success. If they're not comfortable with the tool in their hands, if they can't use it, it's too hard, they're just not going to do it, or they're going to do it wrong. And so that's going to break the process. Garbage in, garbage out, remember? Finally, IT. This is the department we see having the biggest say in vetoing power. They're the ones in the back of the room that sit silent for the most part if they're not being vocal. And at the end of the process, they raise their hand and say, this is just going to be incompatible. We can't do this. Engaging them early on in the process, if not from the get-go, eliminates the heartbreak after 6 months of work, engaging the vendors, doing an RFP, and for them to come in the brand and say, that just can't stack with ours. You can't do that. So make sure you bring them in early. They're generally very nice. Finally, 5 consolidations or considerations for adopting AI and EHS, right? 1, gauge your own organizational readiness. Do you have your own data in order? Is it clean? Do you know what you want to do with AI? You have an internal governance board, right? That's number 2. Once you determine you can do that, you have the operational readiness for it, put together that team, consult experts, make very stringent plans. Plan. Hammer out those processes. How are you going to reevaluate? Next, 3, understand the context of the AI outputs on processes. You want something that's going to fit what you do and give you the answers you need, not something that's going to give you for a tangential problem that's not your priority. 4, develop your confidence in it. Study, talk with vendors, take classes, research, talk to other vendors who have done AI, and figure out the reliability, because nothing's worse than hallucinations. And then 5, build a model to constantly test the AI and outcome. Vendors who say who are succeeding in this aspect and deploying AI to customers work incredibly close with them. They have monthly, if not bi-weekly reviews. How is it doing? These are the outputs. This is what we're feeding it. Does this work for you and whatnot? And finally, process step by step. I talked about this a lot, but again, identify what the current issues are. 2, build that requirements gathering. 3, do your research, consult someone to do, have conversations. 4, build that RFP. And the bigger the RFP, even though it's headache beforehand, it's for the long run. 5, evaluate those vendors. Don't just do one pass, do several. 6, vendor demonstrations. Bring every one of those stakeholders on board. Make them longer than you think you will. It's going to be a pain. You might spend 2.5 hours with 6 different vendor demonstrations, but it will be worth the end. And then finally, short those vendors and start the process over. Make sure they can do everything you want them to do.
And breathe. So we have, thank you so much, Nathan, for bringing us to a close. So we're getting right at the end. We have one more poll question for attendees today, which is, especially after today, hearing the benefits and the reasons why people do consolidate, how important do you feel consolidation, EHS technology and tools is to your organization? And we have a bunch of options here. It's the absolute priority. It's very important to us. Kind of important. It's not really important. We're not doing it, or we don't want to. We don't want to consolidate tools and technology. While we're kind of waiting for people to finish up, we are very much at the top of the hour. So I want to say thank you so much to everybody for attending. We really appreciate having you around. Thank you so much to Nathan. Thank you so much for walking us through the presentation. It was a great look at what's happening in the market. So much research went into that and so much effort. So thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Some of the questions that we had in the Q&A were about, specifically, hey, can Cority do XYZ for me? We will address those directly. Thank you for signing up. 4 questions about whether this session was recorded and whether you'll have access to the slides. It has been recorded and it will be sent to all registered attendees. So you will have a copy of the recording landing in your inbox in 3, 2, 1, etc. Let's take a look at our answers. An absolute priority, it's getting close to the top, but for most people, it's a very important. It's very important. We've hit the end of what we have. Thank you so much for everybody that attended. We will send out that recording. And once again, have a great rest of your day.